Video time again. I'm going to try to get a video done before I put my nose to the grindstone and knock out a bunch more tonight, hopefully. I know it's last minute, but I got a lot of things going on. I was hoping to make a bunch of points this time around. Looks like there'll be 10 again. Okay, so what I'm going to be working on is this piece here made by my friend Ray, who sat with me napping last week. He was sitting on the porch with me napping some Georgetown, and this is a high quality piece of Georgetown. He had some other stuff that he had been working. I think he brought a little bit of it, and it was extremely tough. So he was able to get something out of this piece, which is very easy to work, and he's fairly new. Has not been napping very long. Okay, but what I'm going to try to do is something that I usually get requested during nap-ins, is someone will come up and say, can you do anything with this? Because I got it to this stage and I don't know what to do next, or I can't do anything with it because it'll break after this stage. So I'll just see if I can get this worked down to a nice long narrow point, like a hokum style or something like that. Make sure my tool tips are clean, because it's going to be a lot of pressure work on this one. I should be doing that with the abrader. Get any rock chips out of the tips of these things, because it'll mess up your napping. And as I'm pressure flaking, it'll give me a chance to talk about stuff. So I'll just talk about stuff I've been thinking about. Yeah, okay, I think this pressure flaker will work, although a pointier one might be a little more productive. Let's see. I can get in there with more of a concentrated force type situation. All right, so I'm in the process of designing and building more tools, both for my natural toolkit and my modern toolkit. Thinking about what is effective for me and what is not, and areas that I need to explore, both for request. People are requesting that I go further into depth on the tools, and also so I can maybe start making some other styles that I have not been making before, like more Cody style points, ribbon flaking on points, that sort of thing. So it's good. I've got the indirect percussion down pretty well. I think those tools are not going to change much. What's going to change for me is the pressure tools, and maybe some blade making tools to skin blades off of cores, like vertical punch work on these conical cores or whatever. I have not spent much time at all developing my toolkit for blades. And once I get good at blades, I think blade technology and the experience with making blades can help me with the Folsom technology. because the Folsom flutes and the Cumberland flutes are basically blades taken off from the center of the workpiece. The workpiece actually becomes similar to a conical core, and you just remove a blade from both faces of a core that starts out similar to a conical, except it's very elongated, right? But I think the same technology applies with a long flute as it does with these long blades from conical cores. I'm thinking, maybe wrong on that one, I don't know, but that's the direction that's going in. So before I actually, start making Folsoms or Cumberlands, I'm going to be trying to do blade work. If I get bored with blade work, I might just go straight into the Folsoms and Cumberlands. We'll see. Now, one thing about my particular style of napping is that I use a lot of freehand napping with percussion, and that has solved many issues for me. I can nap freehand with freehand percussion and freehand indirect percussion easily now with most materials, most tool material and most lithic material, most rock material, because the range I have with the indirect percussion, let's see, the range I have with indirect percussion is a lot. It's pretty extensive, because one of the things that I'm thinking affects it the most is I don't have a pad backup. I don't nap indirect percussion with a pad backup. Without the pad, it allows me to have full follow through on my strikes, and the workpiece never touches a pad, which means it doesn't touch something that could break it. Yeah, in the hand it breaks, but a pad doesn't give you any feedback, so you don't know if you're applying too much pressure or too much support in one area as opposed to another. With your hand, you can tell, you can feel what you're doing. You know where you are applying pressure or applying support, right? So my indirect percussion and my direct percussion are padless. I don't use pads. Like, I don't use a bopper down here with a pad when I'm doing direct percussion. I'm out freehand. And with indirect percussion, I don't use a pad either. There's no pad work. I'm going to try to get the same effect with pressure, but it's more difficult. However, I think I'm narrowing it down. One of the things is the void here. This is from use wear, right? But it's been advantageous for me to have a void in front of the pad that makes contact with the workpiece. With my domed pads, the pad makes contact at or near the point of applied force, right? But what I want is not only that, but I want it to be forward. I want the edge to be forward of the point of contact with the pad. So I'm supporting basically the back half of the biface on the pad, and the front half is not supported. Okay, it's still domed, but I think what I'm going to do on future pads is, drill a hole in front of where the pad makes contact with the workpiece, like I do with glass napping. I've already drilled some holes in one of my pads, and it worked out pretty good. That was just to prevent ricochet of flakes coming off the pad, but it's also advantageous for me, in my style of napping, to have a full range of motion and also be able to see what I'm doing, and also to be in the same mindset as I am with my indirect percussion work. Right? If I have more freedom to release flakes without worrying about the pad near or on the point of applied force, it gives me more freedom. Okay? So I used to have a lot of trouble with wobble back in the day. If I did that, it would wobble. So I would put the workpiece on the pad, but it still would wobble, and I would sometimes make contact with the pad and it wouldn't produce a flake that I wanted, because the pad would stop it, or the workpiece would stop at a strange point, and I would have to adjust my holding technique to adjust to where the workpiece would stop as it made contact with the pad. So the pad was compounding the difficulties that I was having. So I tended to scoot the workpiece toward the edge of the pad more and more, and then once I got some use wear into the pad, I found it much easier to flake into that void, and at the same time my grip was getting stronger to hold the rear of the point, rear of the biface, so it wouldn't wobble as much. Okay, so what I'm going to do in the future is I'm going to have more of a void in front and a better hold in the back. My grip is getting better, all right? It's getting stronger, getting more rigid, so I'm getting less wobble. But even when I do have wobble, that wobble doesn't all of a sudden make a strange stop on the pad that messes up my pressure flaker position. If it's wobbling, it can be irregular here, and that irregularity underneath is not going to affect where it stops, at least not in front here. You know what I mean? I'll explain it better as time goes on. But with my style of napping, I don't like using pads for the reasons I've already mentioned, and it's a different style entirely from pad work. Okay? Not because I want it to be different, but that's just the way my napping has progressed, and the way that I mentally and physically am able to nap better is with the lack of a pad as much as possible. My pads are going to get smaller than this. I have used small pads in the past, but they're going to get smaller and hopefully less in the way with my pressure work, because I'm developing my pressure work. I've never really developed my pressure work that much for various reasons. One of them was a strength thing, soreness, and developing arthritis symptoms and blah blah blah. But now that I've changed my diet, changed my workout, changed my workouts to be more conscious of strengthening my wrists, right, and that kind of thing. Paying a little more attention to my weight training when I do it. I don't do it often enough, but do weight training to strengthen muscles that are required for pressure flaking. Oddly enough, I would never have thought that would be something that I would try to do. Okay, so the way I nap is different from those who use pads. Long story short, even though I do use a pad for pressure, I'm getting away from dependency on it and trying to minimize the effect of the pad on the workpiece. Okay. So what am I going to make out of this after 15 minutes of messing with it? I don't know, just a long narrow biface, and then maybe I can make something with it a little bit later. It was starting to get tedious with that pressure flaker. That little that I did anyway. I'm going to do a little bit of indirect percussion on this, although it's risky. It does feel strong enough to support some indirect percussion work. Feels like it. I don't know for sure. Okay. Now, if you're using pads, don't worry about it. The angles are still going to be the same. Materials affect the stone in the same way, you know. It's just the follow through that'll be a little different. And the upper range of force, I think, is greater when you have more freedom by minimizing the pad. Okay. Now there's a joke in there somewhere. Yeah, the tips of these, the steel seems to hold shards very well, so I'm having to clean up the tips a lot. Someone asked me at the Knap end, what's the advantage of steel? And I told them there really isn't much advantage, I'm finding out, except for the lack of tool maintenance and the cheapness, like I've said before, inexpensive tools. As far as advantage by the material, or with the material, there really isn't all that much. And one of the things that makes steel not so good is the fact that it'll hold chips in the tip very well, I'm finding out, which messes up your contact with the platform. It doesn't grip the platform in the same way as chips build up in the metal. And I think it also becomes hardened, cold hardened. You know, some metals become cold hardened when you strike it. I think that happens especially with tough materials in flint knapping, so you got to keep cleaning the tip, both of hardness or hardening of the steel and with the stone being embedded. Copper hardens also, and I think aluminum hardens as well. It's a common characteristic with metals that if you pound on them, they get harder. You either have to soften them up with heat or clean off that hard spot with a file or an abrader or whatever. So yeah, hopefully I'll be delicate enough with this biface. It's mostly downward strikes. I'm not really trying to shoot strikes across, or shoot flakes across. Just maybe halfway. Keep it kind of thick right now, even though that might interfere later with what I want to make. Better thick than broken in half. Okay. And it was kind of odd shape to begin with, so I got to take back this edge and that edge just to make it look straighter. But I'll wait. See if I mess up somewhere, and I might need that mass here and here. If I mess up really bad on this edge, I'm gonna have to scoot this edge way back, and I don't want to lose too much of that edge if that's the case. So I'm just gonna go around the outside again, thinning the ends first, and then work on the middle, as always. Starting to get into the habit of running these flakes close together and doing a pass. If you do a pass over an irregular surface, each flake is different. You can't hit the flakes off in the same way every time because the surface is irregular. And you'll have to hit it maybe a couple times. Not sure why it's not responding. It's because the contour is slightly different. You want to do it the same every single time. Your subconscious wants to do it the same every time. But you'll have to use your conscious mind to do the subtle adjustments if you want to do a pass on an irregular surface. Now if it's perfectly smooth like those flake over grind preforms, then you don't have to adjust your strike or your platform or your angle or anything else. It's all the same. So I had to worry about that little step fracture too. Yeah, I should take out that lump in the middle, but not yet. I think it's still useful to have that so that I don't snap this in half. I think this edge is fine. I'm going to take back these spots that are going to be not part of the final point. So I'll just trim them back. I don't see any advantage to using them too much, although I can thin a little bit now. I don't really need a lot to do the thinning on the tip. It's just very subtle flake removals. They don't lose much of the edge. There's also a risk of overshot when you have the goal of producing a long flake because it's wide. The goal of producing a long flake can also increase the risk of overshot. So sometimes it's better to have a narrow, thick piece, but those are also a pain to work with at the end. Sometimes if you end up with a step fracture and it's really bulgy in the middle, the damage control on those, the step fracture right in front of a turtleback, those are a real pain. Okay. You had to really get lucky to wipe those out in most cases. I think, anyway. So yeah, there's a trade-off. This is very subtle work. A lot of conscious mind maneuvering more than with a wider point, because the narrowness is not forgiving. At any time this could snap much easier than with a wider piece. I think I'm going to keep saying that because I've seen a lot of people struggle with that over and over and over. They struggle with it with these narrow pieces. Okay, so I'm just taking it down little by little. And some pieces like obsidian, they won't let you do this. The obsidian won't let you tap on the bottom with something this long and thin. That'll snap. So keep in mind that some materials you won't be able to do this with. I've had obsidian so delicate that a point that half that size would just snap if I tapped the bottom or the tip. I had to do all my work from the sides. That's pretty low quality obsidian, but it does exist. And if you're like me, just by luck you end up with those pieces. And you think to yourself, am I the only guy that cannot work obsidian? I see these other guys working obsidian just fine. But me, I just look at it funny and it'll snap in half. Well, check the type of obsidian you have. If it's a weird type with strange color or a strange silver sheen to it, in other words, silver sheen obsidian, or it has bubbles or ash pockets, get yourself something else to decrease your misery. You'll thank me later. Yeah, I'm thinking about producing really long, narrow flakes with pressure. I can do some really long, narrow flakes with percussion, indirect percussion. But if I could do some really long, narrow flakes with pressure and do some weight training to increase the muscles that I'm using, increase the strength in the muscles, I may be able to do some really good stuff. We'll see. I may be getting too old for that. Maybe getting too old. Okay, so it's getting pretty symmetrical. Now I just gotta thin it down. Alright, so I'm gonna prepare the edge for thinning. Right now I'm just kind of getting rid of some thick spots. You might be asking, aren't some of those thick spots good for platforms? Yeah, but They don't need to be that thick. I'd rather have a regular edge and then create a continuous platform across that area than to have a few robust areas for specific platforms. I'd rather have a continuous platform. Okay. So yeah, that's set up now for more thinning. So this is the stage where I would stop, and just by coincidence, we've reached the 30-minute mark. For the first 15 minutes with nothing but talking. Yeah, I noticed that too. All right, next segment.